Albert Alonso showed Mosquera true kindness, treating him to trips, gym memberships, classes, and nights on the town. Mosquera accepted every bit of it while plotting to steal the rest. Guys like Yosten Mosquera defy simple labels. He wasn't acting on impulse, nor was he a lunatic who had lost his grip on the real world. The proof suggests he was a man who coldly calculated over weeks that 2 lives were cheaper than the profit from their deaths. Figuring out why he did it is not the same thing as justifying his actions. But it counts, mainly because Albert Alonso and Paul Longworth placed their faith in him. That faith was betrayed with patience and a total lack of feeling, and they certainly deserve better than that. The only silver lining, if one exists, is found in the clues they left behind without knowing it. Security tapes, search logs, and a cyclist camera told the story so well that justice was ultimately served. Darkness has fallen on the 10th of July, 2024. Bristol's Clifton Suspension Bridge, a massive English icon, looms 76 meters over the Avon Gorge below. While thousands traverse it daily, tonight feels incredibly off. A figure clad entirely in black is having a serious struggle. He is wrestling with 2 massive suitcases that look nearly impossible to budge. One of the bags has already lost a wheel. Suddenly, a cyclist riding by notices something disturbingly out of place. Thick dark fluid is leaking right through the luggage zippers, pooling onto the bridge's pavement. Wearing a helmet-mounted GoPro, the cyclist rolls up and addresses the stranger in Spanish. The man responds, clearly frantic and on edge. "You would not believe what they do to me," he stammers in his native tongue. Moments later, an emergency call goes out to 999. Law enforcement is en route. However, the figure in black has already melted into the Bristol darkness. Abandoning the luggage, the contents of those suitcases would send a wave of horror across all of Britain. Yet the discovery made 48 hours later in a silent West London apartment would be even more grisly. Good evening, folks, and welcome back to British Crimes. Tonight we dive into one of the most unsettling cases to rock the United Kingdom recently. It is a tale starting with trust, ending in betrayal, and answering nearly every question but one. How does a person decide that a human life is worth less than the balance in a bank account? Stick around. Are you prepared for the grimmest tales from Britain? Check out our latest release, Unreal True Crime, British Edition. 35 stunning real-life murder cases guaranteed to keep you on the edge of your seat. It is out now on Amazon for Kindle and paperback, or snag an instant PDF from our site. Check the links down in the description. Do not sleep on this. Grab your copy today. Now, let us get back to the case at hand. 62-year-old Albert Alfonso was known as a hard worker. His partner, Paul Longworth, was a 71-year-old retired handyman. The pair shared a cozy apartment over on Scotts Road in the Shepherd's Bush area, located in West London. Locals spoke highly of them. Friends called them a grounded, loving couple. Reports say Paul was in poor health. Albert was his caretaker, yet Albert maintained a busy personal life outside their walls. He recorded encounters with various partners. He frequented adult websites. It was on one of those sites in early 2024 that he met a Colombian national named Yosten Andres Mosquera. Mosquera worked as an adult film performer back in Colombia. The bond formed between him and Alfonso was, as the judge later put it, transactional, legal, and consensual. However, it relied on cash. Alfonso compensated Mosquera for his time and company. Eventually, feelings grew, or so Alfonso thought. He and Paul even flew to Colombia to meet Mosquera face to face. Then came the fatal offer. Alfonso invited Mosquera to come stay in London. Mosquera first touched down in the UK early in 2024. He returned for a second trip in June of that same year. Alfonso bankrolled this return trip. Records reveal he covered a Brighton getaway, a gym membership, English classes, and nights out in the city. By all accounts, it was a generous gesture made with pure intentions. Yet beneath the scenic trips and lessons, a sinister plan was forming in Yosten Mosquera's head. Prosecutors at Woolwich Crown Court later detailed to the jury exactly what Mosquera was up to on his devices. Throughout those weeks in June and early July of 2024, the evidence showed something far darker than a tourist enjoying the sights. It was the cold preparation of a killer. June 18th, 2024, Mosquera Googles where to buy a chest freezer. He is currently staying in the apartment. He sleeps under the same roof as his hosts. Yet he is already shopping for a large appliance suitable for hiding remains. On June 27th, he swipes Albert Alfonso's banking credentials. The very man who flew him to London, funded his lifestyle, and gave him a place to sleep. Mosquera is snapping photos or copying the financial data. Come July 4th, he is translating specific phrases. He needs the right words to coordinate the freezer delivery to the residence. July 8th, he searches for the specific spot to strike ahead to cause death. Just let that sink in. 4 days prior to the killings, Yosti Mosquera was pinpointing the exact fatal spot on the human skull. The presiding judge eventually highlighted one final piece of digital proof. Mosquera had been checking real estate prices for the Scotts Road apartment owned by the couple. The prosecution contended his motive was purely monetary. He planned to seize assets or profit somehow once both victims were out of the picture. To the court, this classified the crimes as homicide for profit. During the proceedings, the defendant spun a completely contrasting story. He alleged that Alfonso had manipulated him and menaced his relatives back home in South America. While confessing to the act, he painted it as snapping under pressure. The story went that Alfonso had actually murdered Paul Longworth first, before he stepped in. The panel of jurors didn't buy it. Neither did the magistrate, not for a second. The browser history, the appliance purchase, the theft of financial data, the real estate checks, none of those actions matched the profile of a scared victim lashing out in a panic. They pointed to a cold-blooded killer who had mapped out every step beforehand. July 8th, 2024, near noon, Paul Longworth, a 71-year-old retiree with failing health, is murdered within the Scotts Road residence. According to the sentencing notes, the assailant bludgeoned him with a hammer. The remains were subsequently stashed beneath a mattress. Longworth was frail and depended heavily on his partner. He never imagined the guest crashing at his house had been Googling ways to end his life. The attack came without notice. Later that night, near 10 o'clock, Albert Alfonso meets his end. How he died remains one of the most chilling details of this entire investigation. Albert lost his life in the middle of an intimate act he had set up to video record. 2 separate devices were rolling inside the apartment. Every moment was captured on tape. That video was eventually screened for the jury at the Woolwich Courthouse. The prosecution presented it as their smoking gun, demonstrating that despite Mosquera's tales of terror or force, the truth of that evening was radically different. In a span of about 10 hours, both partners were deceased. A quiet couple slaughtered inside their personal sanctuary. Mosquera's actions in the immediate aftermath reveal just how calculated this scheme truly was. Initially, he went for the cash. He attempted to wire money straight out of the victims' accounts. He managed to use their debit cards too, pulling out a few $100s at an ATM. Next, he shot off texts pretending to be Albert, contacting his job and friends, making it look like the man was still breathing. Then the chest freezer arrived, the same model he'd looked up weeks prior. He jammed it into a tight spot in the apartment. The corpses of both men were then cut into pieces. He stored their severed heads inside the appliance. That stands as one of the grimmest facts of the whole affair. Using that freezer wasn't a spur-of-the-moment choice. He researched it on June 18th, ordered it using a translator app on July 4th, and used it just as planned. The rest of the remains, specifically the torsos, were stuffed into massive travel bags. Now the killer had to dump the evidence. He required a location that was secluded, striking, and permanent. He settled on the Clifton Suspension Bridge, but to get all the way to Bristol from Shepherd's Bush, he needed a ride. Hauling 2 giant, blood-drenched bags on the subway was impossible. So he booked a private driver with a red van. The chauffeur, clueless about his cargo, collected the suspect at the house and headed for the city of Bristol. He received payment in hard currency. That vehicle turned out to be the critical lead detectives, later dubbed the Golden Nugget. The bright paint job made it stand out. Security cameras picked it up easily. Detectives tracked the license plate, which pointed them straight back to the crime scene. However, that happened down the line. First, the events at the bridge unfolded. Mosquera got there after dark, lugging those 2 heavy suitcases. One bag had a busted wheel. The load was incredibly heavy, and that's when the blood began to seep out. Crimson liquid started oozing from the zipper, pooling on the pavement. Just then, a biker rode by. A camera mounted on his helmet was taping the whole scene. He hit the brakes and addressed the stranger in Spanish. The killer answered, "You wouldn't believe what they did to me." By then, the rider was already on high alert. Passersby spotted the gore on the ground. Someone dialed emergency services immediately. As sirens approached, the suspect ran off, leaving the luggage behind. Guards and pedestrians verified he was there. The helmet cam video provided clear still shots of his mug. Officers unzipped the bags and discovered human body parts, specifically 2 torsos. A massive manhunt kicked off, though it centered on Bristol at first and hit a snag. Albert Alfonso's cell phone appeared active, pinging around London. A mysterious user kept it alive to fake the idea that the man was still breathing. Investigators held off on raiding the apartment over on Scotts Road right away. That snapshot from the GoPro video went viral at breakneck speed. Within hours, Mosquera became the most heavily publicized fugitive in the UK. You saw his mug everywhere: TV, news, social media timelines, and newspaper headlines. With his device powered down, the suspect looked like a ghost. Bristol crawled with police. London detectives worked with local units, but the fugitive melted into the city. Then he slipped up. The guy powered up his phone. The second he did, the signal bounced off local towers. Tech teams pinpointed his exact spot. He was strolling downtown Bristol during the weekend rush, hiding in plain sight. Shockingly, even with his face on every screen in the country, nobody called in a tip during that 48-hour window. On July 13th, 2024, just 72 hours past the bridge incident, officers slapped cuffs on Yasin Andres Mosquera right by the Bristol Temple Meads train station. At roughly the same time, detectives finally breached the door of that Scotts Road residence. The scene inside was called extraordinarily gruesome by everyone who saw it. A chest freezer, severed heads, and clear signs of butchery throughout the rooms. 2 guys who lived quietly there, folks the neighbors actually liked, ended up in such a state. Locating that red van confirmed the details. The driver admitted picking the killer up from the house. That address linked those suitcases found in Bristol straight back to the nightmare inside that West London home. Yasin Mosquera faced a jury at Woolwich Crown Court throughout June and July of 2025. He never denied being there. He didn't deny the men were dead. He actually confessed to killing Albert Alfonso, but pleaded manslaughter, blaming a panic attack. He argued that the victim had groomed him, played him, and controlled him by threatening his family. He swore Alfonso, not him, was the one who murdered Paul Longworth. That was a risky defense strategy, and it crumbled completely under the weight of the digital proof. Lead prosecutor Deanna here walked the courtroom through a precise timeline of events. Googling freezers on June 18th, weeks before the crime, stealing bank info on June 27th, those translation apps used for the courier, checking how much the property was worth. Worst of all, searching on July 8th, the murder date, for how to kill with a head blow. Then came the video. Cameras inside the apartment filmed Albert Alfonso's death. The jury watched the tape. Regardless of his stories about fear or force, that footage revealed truths the defense simply couldn't spin. On July 21st, 2025, the jury delivered the verdict, guilty on both counts. On October 24th, 2025, Judge Joel Benathan handed down punishment to Yasin Andres Mosquera at the courthouse. The judge was detailed and harsh in his speech. He listed every grim factor: killing for money, 2 victims, clear planning, chopping up the remains, targeting Paul Longworth, a sick 71-year-old elder, and abusing the kindness shown by Albert Alfonso. He totally rejected the idea that Alfonso groomed or forced the killer. Sure, there was a money gap involved. The older man paid him. But the court saw that as a motive for murder, not an excuse. Mosquera had built websites back in Colombia and certainly wasn't, the judge ruled, some naive or weak figure Doctors Bernard Chin and Norma Estrada tested the man and flagged specific traits. Able to turn on the charm and act magnetic, easily bored, a liar, showing signs of extreme selfishness and zero compassion. No mental issues lowered the sentence. However, the bench did acknowledge a detail from his childhood story. He spoke about seeing brutal violence as a kid back in South America, like watching kids aged 10 and 14 get killed. Specialists noted this might have warped his view on brutality. It wasn't accepted as a pass, but it went on record, the sentence, life in prison with a minimum of 42 years before parole. The court refused to lock him up forever without hope, noting his clean record and slight sympathy for his past, but emphasized that 4 decades inside ensured he'd be an old man before ever getting a shot at freedom. Since he is a Colombian citizen, the authorities will kick him out of the country the moment he steps out of prison. On a separate note, Mosquera admitted guilt regarding 3 charges related to holding illegal pictures of minors. Consequently, the judge handed down extra prison time, specifically for those disgusting crimes. Albert Alonzo and Paul Longworth should have spent their golden years together in that West London apartment, but no court verdict can ever truly fix what was stolen from them. However, the gavel has banged, and Yosa Mosquera is going to rot in a cell for the majority of his adult life. Horrors like this always force us to ask a question that legal proceedings just aren't built to answer. What kind of person is wired to commit such evil? Fortunately, the judge's comments during sentencing offer a unique peek into the killer's psyche. Mental health professionals evaluated Mosquera to see what makes him tick. While the report didn't reach the threshold of a clinical diagnosis that would reduce his sentence, it paints a picture we really need to look at. The doctors flagged a handful of specific personality quirks. We are talking about superficial charm, getting bored easily, constant lying, massive ego, and a total void where empathy should be. Put them together and you have the dark triad. To be precise, these characteristics sit right in the wheelhouse of psychopathy or antisocial personality disorder. People often make the mistake of thinking charming guys can't be violent. As a matter of fact, charisma is one of the most reliable tools found in the toolkits of dangerous predators. Being smooth helps a monster get close to prey, get invited inside, build trust, and pass as a buddy. In this specific case, the charm was just a weapon Mosquera wielded. It was the key that let him stay close to Alonzo for months, get flown to London twice, and sleep under the same roof as the men he planned to butcher. That total inability to feel for others is probably the biggest red flag from a clinical perspective. For regular folks like us, the idea of plotting to murder a friend who has been nothing but nice is mentally impossible to compute. The emotional walls stopping us are huge, yet Mosquera seemed to walk right through them without blinking. He broke bread with Albert Alonzo, took his cash, traveled to Brighton with him, and simultaneously Googled how to smash a human skull. Mosquera claimed he saw horrific brutality as a kid back in Colombia, even watching other children get slaughtered. The court psychiatrist suggested this background might have warped the way he processes violence. We should take that seriously. Not to let him off the hook, which the judge certainly didn't do, but to understand the mechanics of his mind. A kid who watches people get murdered doesn't just shake it off and grow up normal. Young brains are like sponges, and they get molded by the world around them. Seeing blood and gore over and over without help can rewire a person to see threats everywhere and stop caring about other people's pain. However, and this is the important part, plenty of people survive hellish childhoods without turning into killers. Just because you have trauma doesn't mean your future's set in stone. What trauma does is mix with existing cracks in your personality to make violence look like a reasonable tool to use. For this guy, you take that cocktail of bad traits, coldness, ego, lies, and mix it with a violent past. Add in that weaponized charm, and you get a man who viewed murder as a perfectly acceptable business move. The thing that separates this nightmare from a crime of passion or a sudden snap is the long, cold roadmap of planning. Mosquera tried to claim it was a spur-of-the-moment thing, but impulsive acts don't leave a trail of Google searches about freezers 3 weeks before the bodies hit the floor. The dates of his prep work, June 18th, June 27th, July 4th, July 8th, show a brain working in what shrinks call instrumental mode. It was focused on a target, calculated, and totally cut off from the human suffering involved. Every move was just a step on a ladder, with the goal being cash and the rungs being 2 human lives. That mindset is the ultimate sign of a predator hunting rather than someone lashing out. Reactive violence is usually messy, emotional, and followed by immediate regret. Predatory violence is icy, thought out, and executed with the same logic you'd use to launch a startup. The way Mosquera kept his cool, pretending to be Alonzo and hacking into bank accounts, plus organizing a ride to Bristol after the slaughter, implies he could shut off his emotions in a way that is highly abnormal. The court decided these were contract-style killings for profit, which aligns with a known psychological blueprint. It is instrumental homicide for greed, meaning he didn't even necessarily hate the victims, they were just in the way. To the perpetrator, people are either hurdles or gold mines. Murder is just another transaction. Mosquera seemingly regarded Alonzo's real estate and bank accounts as prizes waiting to be claimed. Consequently, he viewed Alonzo and Paul as issues that needed to be resolved to secure the payout. That brutal math, treating humans as tools rather than lives, is likely the scariest part of his mindset.